But joining us right now to talk about the Commanders, beat reporter for the Washington Post, Sam Fortier. And Sam, most people really love this deal. It's hard finding negatives on the deal for Deebo Samuel. Give us your take on this trade.
I think it's a great deal as well. I think he does a lot of things that they didn't have last year that elevate their offense, particularly on those underneath routes with yards after the catch. I do think there is some risk because, the 29-year-old plays a really punishing physical style. He dealt with, a lot of nagging injuries last year. He's only missed 9 total games in the last 4 years. But anytime you play like he plays, you just have to expect he could miss some time. And also, there have been several instances over the last couple of years of either Deebo saying he's played out of shape or beat reporters saying he's played out of shape. Last year, which was his worst year since his rookie year in 2019, a longtime Bay Area columnist said that he was told that Deebo played 20 pounds overweight. So anytime you hear that, you think to yourself, okay, there's some risk with this guy. I think it's a good move. Adam Peters knows him really well. I think it's worth the risk, but I do think we have to acknowledge there is some risk here.
When did Deebo say he was out of shape himself? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, Deebo said after the 2022 season, he was like, I was awful. It was a year after his All-Pro year. He was like, I was awful because I was out of shape. I was too heavy. I was sluggish.
So there is risk, but he's on the last year of his deal. And look, if he wants to get a big fat payday, whether it's from the Commanders or another team after his deal expires, he knows that he has to come here and put up good numbers and play in 15 plus games and show everybody that last year was an aberration because of the pneumonia and the end of the oblique injury that kind of robbed him of some of his explosiveness. So I don't think there's that much risk. If it blows up in your face, you only gave up a 5th round pick to acquire it.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's totally worth it. And like you said, I think he's going to be a really good option for this offense. I think last year there wasn't a guy, Eckler sometimes, there wasn't a guy who could be a quote-unquote easy answer for Jaden over the middle of the field, or a guy that could turn short passes into long gains. Cliff, I think, there was a lot of pressure on Cliff and Jaden to be perfect, but I think Deebo kind of is a guy that can fix problems and say, hey, you don't have the perfect play called, or, the coverage is difficult. If you give me the ball, I can break some tackles and make something happen. So I think he was totally worth the risk for sure.
What do you think becomes of the trio of free agent wideouts that played pretty well last year? De'Ami Brown, Noah Brown, and Zaccheaus. What do you think happens there? Any of those guys get retained? I would think the favorite to get retained there is De'Ami Brown, since he was drafted by this team, even though by a different regime. I just feel like Noah Brown and Zaccheaus are guys who are probably going to walk.
I actually feel a little differently. I think that De'Ami Brown definitely showed a lot last year, especially toward the playoffs. He became more professional, more consistent. I really like what Zaccheaus did. I think that they liked him a lot. He was very consistent. Obviously not the most productive guy, but I think he displayed a lot of what they wanted. I remember that fumble recovery against Cleveland where he's making that fumble recovery 40 yards downfield because he's playing hard. But I'm curious to see what his market is like. You're probably not going to get in a bidding war with him. And if another team values that and wants to bring him in, then maybe you don't get him back. But I think De'Ami, he still was a little bit inconsistent. And I think that they still clearly need a legitimate number 2 receiver opposite Terry. I don't think of Deebo, and this is not a shot at him, I don't think of him as a quote unquote number 2 receiver because I think you need another guy who can run out of static. You want someone who can line up on the outside and win by route running, create separation. And Deebo, while he's a great weapon, I don't think that's him. And so I think you need, whether it's Darius Slayton or another one of these guys, I suggested on Twitter yesterday, and some people did not like it. I think if Devontae Adams, if they release him, I think you check into it. I'm not saying, you pay him a lot of money or give him multiple years or anything, but I think you need a traditional quote unquote number 2 receiver opposite Terry still.
Well, what do you think? So in terms of the draft, now that they went out and got Deebo, do you think that they're going to focus more on maybe in the first round, second round, they're going to focus more on defense, offensive line? Do you think they're still looking at receiver kind of early, depending on who's there? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I have the same thought that you do. Like, those are other positions that they need more of. But then I go back to last year in the second round, like defensive tackle was not a position that we were talking about as a position of need. And then they go out and get Johnny Newton because he's the best player available and he's at the top of their board when they pick in the second round. So while I do think those are bigger needs for them, I'm wary of pigeonholing them because I know Adam Peters is going to follow the board and kind of figure out where the value is and take that.
So we're talking to Sam Fortier from the Washington Post on the Ruud Guest Hotline. Ruud, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV. So when we look at the draft right now, the Commanders have picks in the first 3 rounds. Then they don't have any picks in the 4th and 5th round, right?
Right.
Yeah, a big hole in the draft right now.
I mean, this is, I asked Adam Peters at the Combine. I said, this was like on Tuesday, I was like, if you make a significant trade, will you still have the draft capital to build through the draft, which he said he's always wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And he was like, look, like I'm going to make the team better, kind of gave a standard typical GM answer. But I do think that that's like a legitimate question now. Maybe he has a trade lined up for Jonathan Allen, but I would be very surprised if, he gets more than a 6th or late round pick swap. Like that has been sort of the market that, as I understand it. And so, yeah, he could add a late round pick, but in a deep draft like this, going into the draft with not that many picks, I would think that makes them a prime candidate to trade down out of the first round if we get there and things look similar or the same as they do now.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think he moves off 29 and moves like the 35 to 40 in order to recoup a 4th or a 5th rounder? Or maybe he moves further back to get multiple picks in those rounds where he's dealt away the picks?
Totally. And I think, Schefter said over the weekend, like, that the difference between the NFL community believes that the difference between it was something like pick 15 and pick 35 is not that different this year because of the talent that you have in the draft. And so it's like, when you hear that, especially when you look at how deep the edge rusher class is, if that's, a position you go for, because I do think they certainly need someone there, like that to me it would be a very enticing decision.
Other than quarterback, it's remarkable what they did last year, considering you could look at every level, every position, and say, well, they certainly need an upgrade there. If you had to prioritize it at this point after the Deebo signing, what would it be?
Edge rusher, to me, like they still lack, not even playmakers, but they only have, I believe, like 3 or 4 defensive linemen who even played a snap for them last year. And, setting not just rushing the passer, even though that's arguably the most important thing on defense in the league, also setting the edge against the run. Like, you guys remember the first play of the NFC Championship game with Saquon, getting out and breaking that thing. Like, that is an issue that they had, and they need to fix it. And so I would say edge rusher still is at the top of my board.
Are you bullish or bearish on Lattimore returning to any form that would make the fans happy?
It's a tough one, man, because Marshawn, obviously, he has played really well. It was the first big, I think, gamble by Peters. I think that he has a shot to return to the level that he was at, but I don't think it is guaranteed. And this is, I think, one of the other reasons I think you need to get edge rusher help is if you can have a more consistent pass rush, then I think that you help guys like Lattimore. You can help your coverage unit in general. And so I would say you gotta surround him with the right talent as well. But yeah, that's one of the biggest questions I have when we get to camp is can Marshawn get back to that form?
So it looked like Coach Quinn had kind of a funny moment talking about Bobby Wagner. What can you fill us in on the likelihood of Wagner returning?
We asked him that, and he was like, you got to talk to his agent. And we were like, oh, okay. And then he hit a beat, pause, and then smiled and was like, he is his own agent. So he's been waiting to say that for a long time. Look, I think it's totally possible that Bobby returns. I think DQ seemed optimistic about it when we asked him, but Pete Carroll is the head coach in Vegas now. They obviously have a long history. I think that they could, try to make an offer, sort of like Washington did last year, bring a veteran guy in who also is still very good at linebacker. Don't get me wrong, but you bring a veteran guy in to help, kind of set the tone for the culture. But at the same time, Bobby really values Ken Norton, the Commanders linebackers coach. I think he really likes Jaden. I would question whether he wants to start over somewhere else on a rebuilding team when it seems like the Commanders are positioned to win now. So I think the Commanders are going to have a strong chance to retain him. But there's obviously people out there that would love to have him there as well.
Sam, how would you structure the running back room, and where does that leave Brian Robinson?
I think you need to add an extra, whether that be in free agency, whether that be in the draft. I think you need a home run hitter, a speed guy. And, I think that I think Eckler and B-Rob are, they're good backs, but I think you need to add a little something extra because we saw last year, I know Brian Robinson had that 40-yard touchdown against Tennessee, but there was just, that's kind of what I'm talking about with Deebo. Like they just lacked a home run threat who could you give them the ball and they do the rest. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, what's the deal with Terry McLaurin's contract? Isn't he entering the last year of his deal, 2025?
Yes, he is. He is entering the last year. And we asked Adam Peters in Indianapolis, hey, should we expect a Terry McLaurin contract extension? Mm-hmm. And he was like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about that. But he is in the last year of his deal. He counts $25.5 million against the cap, which is a little bit below the top of the market for what receivers are making right now. But he has no guaranteed money, so it's
after putting up those numbers, man, he's in for a nice payday.
Absolutely. So I think that's definitely on the table. People should be looking out for that. It's he's entering his age 30 season, so it would be interesting to me what exactly that looks like. But obviously he balled out last year, was a really important part of this offense, and then they got to make sure that he's here for a while.
By the way, I haven't heard a lot about it. Is the coaching staff largely going to be intact for next year?
Yeah. I mean, they lost the assistant special teams coordinator, but that is the only major.
That's kind of remarkable.
That's the only one,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you come off a year like that, you expect to say, oh, okay, people are going to go here or go there, and I think notably. There were a lot of interviews, Cliff, took the head coaching interviews. Tavita Pritchard interviewed for the offensive coordinator job down in Jacksonville. But they blocked assistant QB's coach David Blau from interviewing with the Jets. So they're going to run this thing back. And I would say that if they have a similar year to what they did last year, they should definitely prepare to lose some guys, including Cliff Kingsbury, who said obviously that he wants to be a head coach again at some point.
That's Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. Thanks for joining us, pal.
Of course.
Thank you,
for having
Sam.
me, guys.
All right. Thanks,
Sam.
buddy.
Sam touched on what the Commanders may do next. What do you want to see them do next? Sam says they'll need a perimeter wide receiver.